When you're mixing up your bread dough, you might start to think this doesn't look quite right to me. Too wet, perhaps, or possibly too dry. If you start to think that something might be up, let's find out for sure if it is. Squash the worry, fix the problem. Roll it! Hey home bakers, welcome back. I'm looking a little bit better this week, aren't I? When I got that edit back from last week's video, I thought, oh, Jack looks a little bit bashed up still. Apologies, I hope it didn't weird you out, but I'm fine now. Look at me, I'm healing. Yes. If you're worried that your dough's not looking right, if you feel stressed out, take a breath with me. Let's do it together. Oh yes, always makes everything better. It's frustrating, isn't it, when something goes wrong and you don't know if it has or what it is that's caused it. I understand that. We'll be covering a few simplified examples and solutions throughout this video. So before you do anything, before you tweak and adjust anything, watch this all the way to the end because you might miss a little nugget of wisdom that may well apply to your specific scenario. There are three things that naturally come to mind when things like this happen. One, everything is actually fine. Maybe I'm just prematurely overanalyzing my bread dough at this stage. Two, this recipe must be wrong. Ah! Or three, regardless of how sure I am that I measured everything exactly right, maybe I might have actually measured something wrong by accident. Before we get too deep into fixing various problems, let's talk about two of the simplest things it could have been to clear those up and get them out of the way before we continue. Did you convert something like from ounces to grams perhaps, or maybe you doubled up or halved the recipe? Hopefully if you did, you wrote everything down with your best friend. Oh my gosh, where's my pencil? With your best friend, and if you did, just cast your eyes over those numbers, double check them, make sure they're all right. Maybe one of them's wrong. From there, you can find the one that you fluffed up and fix things from there. Did you measure flour in cups, volume instead of in weight? Measuring flour in cups is a total lottery, and you'll have seen me talk about it on this channel before. If you measured stuff in cups, please make this the last time that you do it because your bread will thank you for it. Always measure by weight in grams or ounces. That's fine too. What can I say here to help you out apart from don't do it again? Not a lot. I don't know where you're at and neither do you, and there's no way of checking it. Oh, let's carry on. Awkward. Maybe your dough feels too loose. Wet and sticky, it flows and it spreads easily and is tricky to manage or knead on the table. Or your dough could be stiff, crumbly. You can't get all the flour into the dough despite your best efforts to mix and cut and squeeze up your dough. Or maybe you can get it in all together, but it's really hard now. Either way, the first step to find the solution is to find out the weight of it. So scrape your dough into a clean bowl over some scales with as much as you can from your scraper and your hands and write down the actual weight of the dough that you've made. The next step is to find out exactly what our dough should weigh if in fact we measured everything correctly. And the way we do this is to add together all the ingredients in our recipe. Here's my recipe, and we can see with the power of maths that my dough should weigh 827 grams. Now your actual dough weight will be more than it should be, less than it should be, or exactly the same as it should be. And we'll deal with exactly the same as it should be a bit later on. Let's start with the easiest. If your dough weighs less than it should be, well then you're in luck because this is the easiest fix of them all. It means that something is missing from the bowl that should be in there and isn't. It's our job next to find out what that thing is, how much of it is missing, and to add it back to the bowl. And then everything will be fine. So what's missing? Well, if your dough is too wet, there must be something dry missing. And in my simplified 4-ingredient recipe, that dry ingredient is flour. It must be. So weigh your dough, subtract the weight it should be to find out exactly how much is missing. Here my calculation reveals that 104 grams of flour is missing. It is so easy to accidentally weigh 400 grams of flour instead of 500 grams of flour. That's probably what I've done. I can safely assume that I lost 4 grams of dough in the atmosphere, or in my hands, or stuck to my scraper all over the table somewhere. So I can simply add 100 grams of flour back to my bowl, cut it in with my dough scraper, mix it all up, and I'm back where I should be with nice dough, exactly like I should have been in the beginning. If your dough is too dry, then the missing ingredient here must be something wet. In this case, water. The fix is the same, but let's go through it anyway because I already shot the footage and we might as well, right? Let's go. Weigh your dough. Subtract the weight it should be to find out exactly how much is missing. 106 grams of water is missing, and once again, I'm way more likely to fluff a nice round number like 100 over 106. So I'll write off the 6 as the mess that I made along the way and add an extra 100 grams of water back to the dough. Adding moisture back to your recipe, it can be trickier than adding flour, especially if you've mixed up your dough into a big stiff mass. The best thing to do is remain patient. Keep cutting it in, squeeze it through your fingers if you need to. It'll all go in and you'll have saved the day once again. Nice one. High five. If your dough is heavier than it should be, things are a little bit trickier because it means that there's something extra in your bowl that shouldn't be there, and there's no way of getting it out. Or is there? No, there's no way of getting out. In this scenario, in order to save our dough, we need to make more bread, and this time I'll do one example to illustrate. Step 1, we need to find out what it is that's extra in the bowl. Easy. You'll know this already. If it's too wet, then it's the liquid element, water. And if it's too dry, then it must be too much of the dry element, flour. This one is wet, meaning for us, it's too much water. Step 2, how much is extra? Weigh the dough and subtract the weight that your dough should be. I was a little bit clumsier this time around, so I'll make the assumption that I actually lost 8 grams in the mess that I made, meaning that I actually added an extra 100 grams of water to the recipe, and that's why it's too wet. That's the most likely error that could have happened while I was measuring. Now we have all this information, we have 2 available solutions. We could use the power of maths and percentages and ratios to marginally increase all the other ingredients to accurately reflect the increase in the amount of water, bringing everything back in line and add all that to the bowl. But there's a level of faff that is too much for me, and that is way beyond. What I actually do is double up the recipe and make 2 loaves of bread instead of 1. I'll add all the ingredients all over again to the bowl, minus the quantity of the additional ingredient that was extra in the bowl already. Does this make sense? Let me show you what I mean. Take the original recipe, minus the additional 100 grams of water, and add everything else back to the bowl, making a double batch of bread exactly the way that it should have been all along. Got it? Mix it all up together, give it a little work, and well done, you've saved the day. Plus, you can give the extra loaf to your neighbour, and when you do, make sure you get a little bit of parchment paper and also gift them a nice little chunk of actual butter to go with it, in case they open their fridge and pull out some margarine, spread it all over the bread like, oh my gosh, why? So gross. The same goes if the flour was the ingredient that's too much. If your dough was too dry and too heavy, the flour's too much, just add everything back in, minus the additional flour that's already in the bowl. And I'm really trying to explain this in the most clear and concise way possible. Let me know if I've achieved it. Whew. Right. Yes, there's more. Next. If the dough felt wrong, and it weighs exactly what it should weigh, you've got a couple of questions to ask yourself. That sounded quite intimidating, didn't it? I didn't mean to intimidate you. Couple of questions to ask yourself. Did you swap some of the flour, or all of the flour, out for something else? Did you swap some or all of the flour out for something else, thinking flour is flour, so maybe I'll just cut half of this with rye flour to make it more healthier and everything will be fine? Or did you just swap everything out for gluten-free flour, thinking I'll just make it without the gluten and it'll be exactly the same as regular bread? and then I can give it to my gluten-free neighbour. It's a logical assumption to make that flour is just flour, but it isn't. They're all very completely different and need to be catered for in a completely different manner. In this scenario, if this is where you're at, it's fine. I'm not judging you. You're not alone in making that assumption, and here's what I would do. Personally, and I know this is not for everybody, I would continue the recipe as it is, while making notes along the way. I would make notes of my observations so I could learn for myself exactly why my past assumption was the wrong one, or possibly, because it could happen, exactly how I went about making accidentally the best bread of my life. Could happen. What I know for sure is that you'll learn nothing by just throwing it away. Not for everyone. I understand that. Another question you could ask yourself is, do you trust the person who wrote the recipe? If so, continue on, because that's probably the structure of the dough that was intended in the first place. Ciabatta recipes are supposed to be really super wet and sticky, for example, whereas a bagel is supposed to be a kind of tight, drier kind of dough. Again, there are lessons to be learned through observation, so take notes as you go along. Get a notepad and write things down like, this feels a little bit wet while I'm mixing it, maybe possibly it is a little bit too wet. And then observe the final bread and adjust things for next time should you need to. It might be the case that you end up writing something down like, this felt really wet to the beginning, I thought I did it wrong, but actually the bread came out really lovely. It was properly wicked and crusty and moist on the inside at the end of it all, so really it was totally worth sticking it all out to the end. Nice one, Jack. Smiley face. Cheer yourself on. Yes. Next time, if you want to avoid all of this worry, all of the stress and the faff, here's what you do. These simplified examples we've talked about up to this point, things are pretty easy to figure out what's missing. It's probably normally the flour or the water. But things start getting tricky when you're making enriched bun doughs with stuff like butter in it, and eggs, and milk, and other such ingredients. So if you want to avoid all this faff from the beginning, pre-weigh everything out on a tray all nice. And double check them as you go along. Bring your mind to what you're doing as you are doing it and make sure everything is bang on. There's been times where I've been making a bun dough thinking to myself, this looks a bit dry, this is a bit stiff, and then I've looked to my left where my tray of ingredients was, and there is the egg that I should have put in all along, looking at me, going, hello, I'm here, you forgot me, the egg. That's why everything's messed up. Just pop me in, everything's fine. Fixed. There is a lesson to be learned in the suspicion that you may have made a mistake. Whether you have or not, in the investigation process, finding out if you actually have or not. You'll learn nothing by just adding stuff to the bowl willy-nilly without measuring or weighing just to try and fix it in the end. And you'll also learn nothing by throwing it in the bin. Observe what you're doing. All the time, right? Not just when you make a mistake, right? No, it's all the time. You'll be sweeping that worry aside and becoming a more confident home baker every single time you do. Massive thank you to all patrons and everybody for dropping super thanks and signing up to the Home Bakers Club. I hear that you are enjoying my online bread making courses, and that means a lot. As always, I try in these videos to give you the tools you need to be able to make your own decisions, because that's what builds confidence and that's what makes you more accomplished in the kitchen. And I look forward to seeing you again very soon. Bye-bye.